Hello, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 21 of A Call from the Stars, A Call to Arms. Point of View, Captain Sin, Terran Military. Well, it's taken us about a year, but we finally are getting ready to drop on the Lizard's homeworld. I didn't think it was this close, but hey, I'll take the bonuses where I can get them, right? Regardless, this is going to be a difficult one. Main reason is the almost the entire planet, about 90% of it, except for the poles, are swampland. It's going to be like fighting in the bayous down in Louisiana, Georgia, and Florida. This is not going to be easy to do. Now, the only bonus is that the enemy is so large that they are also limited. But this also means that our heavy weapons and such can't function. Our tanks will sink, our mortars will just go straight into the mud. This is going to be a slog fest if there ever was one. The only bonus is we got a few of our lizard cohorts that are going to be there, and they're going to be able to move very, very easy in this type of terrain. However, I'm not looking forward to it. As we were burning towards the planet, we could actually hear over the radio how the enemy must be getting desperate. They're taking shots from near planet orbit, which is not exactly a smart thing to do. You fire too much, you lose your anti-grav motors, and you're stuck in that gravity well. You ain't coming out. You're going down hard. However, we can see what they're doing. They're hoping we're not going to fire at their ships and a chance that we're going to miss and actually impact the planet. Using civilians, or in this case slaves, as meat shields. They clearly don't know who we are. It is unfortunate, extremely unfortunate, but you use someone as a meat shield, we're going through that meat shield, and we're going to take you out. And the more meat shields you use, the more pissed off we're going to be, and the more mean we're going to be once we get a hold of you. As such, we could hear over the comms how the enemy fleet had basically carpeted one side of the planet with their own ships, all sitting broadside, hoping to get close, hoping that we would have to get within range with our energy weapons. They were not expecting those new particle lasers coming from the destroyers. Now, granted, the particle lasers take up almost the entire keel of the ship. I don't know if they're ever going to be able to downsize these things, but their range is absolutely insane compared to other energy weapons. Now, this is not to say they have the same range as any of our projectiles, far from it. But the fact that they more than double the range of anything the enemy can throw at us, well, this ought to make things interesting. Unfortunately for us, as soon as that first volley went off, the enemy got smart really, really quick. They broke their lines and they drove at us as fast as possible. It was suddenly an alarm. We all know that alarm. And you know the music. It's time to dance. It left all us troopers running for our pods because we knew at any time we could be dropped out, even outside the atmosphere, and just hope the gravity well pulls us in. Oh, it's a bad feeling if the ship gets hit and you're just floating there. You only got a certain amount of time before your oxygen runs out. Not a good feeling. That being said, we were not expecting what we saw the enemy to do. As it turns out, the enemy realized that they have much better mobility than we do, and their ships are dancing through space, closing the distance, trying to get anywhere within range. Our main particle weapons, granted they could fire, the problem is they are very, very hot. They can only fire up 3 to 4 times depending on the ship and depending on the situation before they have to find some way to cool down, or they just have to stop firing. You'll blow the reactor if you don't do that. Which means they had to pull back, and the enemy saw this and must have figured it out, because all we heard was, prepare for drop, prepare for drop. I'm thinking, aren't we still an hour out? what the hell is going on out there? And of course, our Corvette starts shaking like crazy, even though we're inside a huge battleship. I'm thinking, oh crap, please tell me they're not going to drop us while we're this far out. That would be bad. That would be bad. At that point, I had to actually go across the comms and tell everybody to shut theirs down and set them to receive only. I did not want to hear them cursing. I really didn't, as I was trying to listen into my own. As the enemy continued to dance across the stars, they did begin to get within range. Now, they do not have much for turret-mounted weaponry, so they had to aim their ships. We were just hoping that our guys could keep them back long enough before they got inside our battle group. Once they did, those broadside cannons on the dorsal, ventral, starboard, and port sides can just open up on us, and we have no idea to this day how many times they can fire without overheating, if they overheat at all. The semi-organic material that they use just bleeds heat. We never understood how to make that. Either that or the eggheads haven't figured out how to fasten it to our ships. Regardless, all we heard over the comms from our command was stand by for excessive G. I'm like, oh crap, I don't know which direction I'm facing. In other words, they're going to bull rush towards the planet just to get us on there. We felt our Corvette detach and separate itself from the main battleship. And then off we go, again at flank speed. These pilots, I swear they do this. It's not just to piss us off, but they like to shake us up a little bit. All I could say is, guys, I like my internal organs in the pieces they are currently in. Thank you. That being said, they tried what they could to flank around the enemy, but you get within range, and the enemy was still trying to open up. Our battleships, destroyers, and even frigates were firing just constantly as the enemy got within range. Once they're within range of our torpedoes, missiles, and coil guns, it was almost a slaughter. That being said, almost a slaughter. The enemy was still able to bring that many ships. There must have been at least 400 of the damn things. All of them about half the size of one of our destroyers, inside our formation and cause all sorts of holy hell havoc. What they were not expecting, though, was what we call a point defense system. And the point defense system, even though it's just bullets, was starting to just perforate their ships. At that range, they're not missing, and they're just blowing all sorts of hole through any weak spot. That gave us the opening we needed. Our pilots immediately made for the planet. Watching on the radar, we could see that we were about 30 minutes out, and that's a long 30 minutes when all you can do is sit there and hope the ship doesn't take any hard hits. Watching the radar, I could see that one of the corvettes was actually disabled and had to eject their pods. I have no idea where they're going to land. All I could do, because he can't move in there, I couldn't bless him off. Say, I hope you guys make it down. Because all they are is just floating through space, pointed towards a gravity well. Oh boy. I can only imagine what's going through their minds right now. Because like the man says, there's a million ways to die in space, and they all suck. The Corvette I was on lucked out and made it to the outer atmosphere of the planet. At that point, all we heard was, prepare for drop, 30 seconds. I flipped on the comms and told everyone, 30 seconds out, prepare for drop. I didn't even get the words out. Suddenly, they just dropped us. And we just fell out of the bottom. A standard drop, of course. But down we went. Trying to get a topography on where we were going, we were extremely off course. The drop, from what I could see, was even more messed up than Normandy on D-Day. But you know what? This is what we trained for. hitting the ground with one hell of a big splat. The doors flew off, and immediately the bottom of our pod filled up with water. Slogging down in through the mud, I realized that we're all going to be sinking at least ankle up to knee deep through this. Grabbing our weapon system, I realized we were really deep into it now. Setting out a rally signal, I gave them all an area to go for, and I'll see him when he get there. At least I hope so. Looking up, I could see other pods coming in, and they're scattered all over the place. Hoping they're not mine and all my men made it down, but I doubt it. The typical shaking and shooting that usually happens, along with all the fighters that filled the sky. The enemy apparently had some sort of terrestrial fighter, but it was clearly outmatched. This thing was extremely organic, and I don't know. I'm like, at least use props, not flapping wings, you morons. Even our space superiority fighters could come down and take these things out, which was good because I did not want to catch any flak from the air. It was bad enough the enemy had figured out that if they massed a whole bunch of artillery and found out where we were, they could make us suffer. However, at this point, since we were so scattered, all the artillery shots went wild. It was almost like a recon by fire, if you know what that is. Slogging through the mud, we didn't find too much of the enemy. Reason being, again, they are so heavy, they don't like the mud either. So we had to work our way forward. The only positive side was that our lizard brethren were able to fly almost literally through the mud. They ran through like it was nothing, like it wasn't even toe deep. They're bouncing off all these trees so they could see what was going on. All I could think was, dude, how did you lose? Then I realized the enemy is really, really big and really tough. Those claws that our lizard friends have do not have the ability to get through the carapace. Regardless of all that, thankfully almost all my platoon made it to the rally point at the same time I did. And guess what? It wasn't just my platoon. I say my platoon because that's the one I came from. I'm now the company commander, and we had all but 2 of my personnel there as we started moving forward. They called in, said they were already ahead of us, so hey, let's get moving. Unfortunately, where we were moving to was a built-up city. This is where things get very, very, very interesting, or as one would say, very sporting. The enemy was waiting, this time again with projectile weapons, but these projectile weapons were very large, even though every time they fired they had to be reloaded. It was like being hit with a baseball going about, I don't know, somewhere the fraction of the speed of sound. It was enough to knock us down, not quite enough to keep us down inside our armor, but definitely more than enough to stop any of the lizards because their armor was much, much thinner than ours. They just couldn't operate in our heavy armor. As we moved forward, you could hear the mounting clangs of these balls hitting us. Unfortunately, what happened was they had found a few of those small plasma bolts or energy weapons. Those definitely slowed us down. No matter how many times we tried to call in for an orbital bombardment, it was denied. They had to make sure that all the civilians were out. So we did what we can to just get in and try to get all the slaves freed. As we did, we saw something that again horrified us. The enemy that we were facing would take its 2 manipulating arms, hold 2 live slaves in front of them, and charge at us. This would make the lizards pause. They wouldn't fire, they wouldn't stab, they wouldn't slash, they wouldn't do anything. However, we're human. As I raised my rifle, and everyone else did, I just said to myself, and I whispered to them that were being held, I'm sorry. And I said, fire. At that, a whole bunch of rounds cut the slaves apart and ripped that enemy to pieces. All I could hear from my men is, these goddamn sniffs. Fuck you, you goddamn sniffs. I'll kill you all, you son of a bitch. They didn't just hold up slaves, they held up children. Children. These things were barely the size of an infant. Uh, Babies with tails. I mean, what the hell? In some cases, they even threw them at us, thinking we would shoot them. No, we just take the hit. That being said, unfortunately, once we got on dry land, even though we could move, it got very close quarters very quick. And this is where the sniffs have a bit of an advantage. They are, for their size, very fast. Their full run is about that of a galloping horse, if not a little bit faster. Those blades are a good 4.5 to 6 feet long, just about razor sharp. They get a good swing on you, it's going through your armor. However, if they don't get a full swing, it's only going to go partway through. The end of it comes down to a bit of a hook, almost like a cutting scythe for vegetables or wheat or something like that. Unfortunately, this hook would many times get stuck in our armor and they would try to drag us off. Bad idea, especially when somebody can still reach their weapon or have it in their hand. Point blank range with a 50 caliber or better? Yeah, that sniff is pretty much done. Unfortunately, we only got about a half a kilometer in, and we had another 20 or so kilometers to go, and we just could not make headway. The sniffs were coming in, they were lobbing huge boulders at us, using those energy weapons, those projectile weapons. We didn't have the heavy weapons to continue pushing forward, and our losses were beginning to mount heavy at that point. I called up for any reinforcements, and to my surprise, they sent down a shuttle. Looking, I didn't recognize the shuttle for a moment, but I knew I seen it somewhere. And then it hit me like a bowling ball to the nuts. I saw this in an old science fiction. Is this where everybody gets their ideas? The shuttle came down, and when I say shuttle, it was pretty damn big. Pretty wide, too. To the life of me, I don't know how the thruster slash booster engines kept it aloft. Maybe it had an anti-grav motor in it, I'm not sure. But when it landed and the doors opened, I saw things step out that just blew my damn mind. They had made the combat, what do they call them? Mechs? Yeah, these bipedal walking things, just, some of them kind of walked like chickens. Two of them did. Two of them walked like people. All four of them different shapes, but apparently this was a standard that they only had four different ones. One loaded up with a whole bunch of missiles, another one with a bunch of guns on it, and one, I swear this thing was just armor and had almost no guns on it at all. These things loomed over us and then just started laying all sorts of waste to the enemy lines. With this, I got their call sign and immediately told them to cover our advance. They were happy to help. I would find out later that for these to work, not any random soldier could just jump in. With our current technology level, you actually had to have your CNI, your cranial neural interface, removed and a much more advanced one installed. Unfortunately, once this one was installed, it was permanent. It was never coming out, and it would never fully heal over. Well, kind of feel bad for those guys, but it is what it is. Thankfully, to them helping out, we were able to bust into the buildings and try to get as many of the slaves out as possible. They were scared of us, and I can't say I blame them. If you never saw a human before, one in full body armor was not a sight that was welcoming, especially when we're carrying one of those honking projectile weapons in our hands. Thankfully, our lizard counterparts were able to go in and settle their nerves a little bit. That same shuttle stood by while we got as many of the refugees in as possible. They weren't actually going orbital, they were simply going to another area where they had sent up triage and other medical to take care of the slaves and let them know what's going on. That would have been what happened. But the sniffs got smart. They started calling in artillery on that shuttle, and they beat the holy piss out of it to the point where they actually had to abandon it. They shut the engines down, and the hull, at least 20 to 40% of it, was torn to pieces as it just sat there like a big old square metal pancake. I'm like, well, there's our ride home. I guess we're here for the duration. Unfortunately for the sniffs, they didn't realize that once you forced the human to fight, you backed him into a corner. Just like any other animal, we got one choice, and it ain't flight. I can tell you that much. The fight all the way to the center of their city was nothing more than a complete and total slog. Every corner, there was another sniff getting ready to swing at us. Every time we got into their version of a hallway, they'd be trotting down, running straight at us. Every time we got in an open area, more of their new projectile weapons and their energy weapons would start raining down on us. It was a straight up urban fight, and I can tell you, those are not in any way, shape, or form fun. And the casualties were getting even more and more and more. It was starting to look like might actually be pushed out of the city. I kept screaming for reinforcements, but they kept saying it's too hot, it's too hot, it's too hot. I could see that. That shuttle was now in actually several very large pieces. The enemy had not stopped bombarding the crap out of it. I guess they want to make sure it was totally done. The only thing that helped us keep moving was the introduction, as you were, as or of these giant machines. The enemy had no way of stopping them. Don't get me wrong, their energy weapons were scorching the crap out of the armor, and some of it was even flaking off. I'm guessing it was ablative armor of some sort. But they just couldn't find a way to break through, except for one. As soon as the enemy turned their artillery away from that ship onto these machines, that's when they had to scatter. They had to keep moving. They couldn't sit there and rain holy hell like you would think. Artillery started ripping them apart, and I watched two of them go down. The lighter two that were there just got tore up. You would think this would cause morale to drop. They didn't realize, again, we're human. We don't lose morale. We just get angrier, and you wouldn't like us when we're angry. It was about that time we started running actually completely out of ammunition. A bunch of us, including myself, started pulling blades. I looked at my platoon sergeants and platoon leaders, and I just gave them the word, charge! And off we went, straight into the belly of the beast. And we jumped at these sniffs. They swung at us. They tried to hit us with their extra appendages. We would drive our blades into their necks, trying to rip their heads off, grabbing their arms, twisting, snapping them off like a crab claw. They would yell, scream, and kick. Their huge legs would launch out, hit one of our guys. That's enough force to send one of our mechanical forms flying a good 30 feet, which didn't feel good if you survived it. It was all hand-to-hand combat from there on out, and we were taking them down piecemeal, trying our very best not to take out the slaves while doing it. And then we saw what we truly did not want to see. When we got to the center, we saw another one of their hatcheries with all their eggs, and we found out what happened to the rest of the slaves. The rest of the slaves were actually thrown in with the young sniffs, and the young sniffs began to eat them alive. Looking down as two of us had kicked in one of the sniffs that we killed, its body rolling down into the pit where the young ones were. We looked down, and the screams of pain that were coming from the lizards that were thrown in there. Old, young, men, women. We even saw a female lizard holding on to what seemed to be an infant, as both her legs and her tail had been eaten off, yet she was still trying to protect it. She must have lost at least 2 digits on one appendage. We looked down for only a moment, and before I could say anything, I saw my men jump down in a fury of sheer and utter hatred as they crushed each one of these sniffs as I screamed, "No, no, not the young. You don't kill the young." But I couldn't stop them. They went in, and whatever sniff was in the way for them to grab a live lizard did not make it. The few sniffs that noticed this actually backed up, but those that were right in the way decided to attack. Some only about the size of a medium dog, as they raised their mandibles, raised their bladed arms, and swung at the legs of our armored men. The blades not strong enough and or sharp enough yet to actually break through the metal, as they were kicked off to the side, crushed underfoot. And even one, as it was eating the chest out of one of the lizards, who was still screaming in pain as its arms had already been eaten off. One of my men picked up that sniff, looked it in the eye, and as it swung at his face, he crushed it in his metal gauntlet. I would have to remind them we don't do this sort of thing, but I understand why they lost it. The lizards that were under my command were even worse. They didn't just save their fallen, they went with an unholy vengeance to try and kill every last snip that was there. Every single one. Whether it surrendered or not, it didn't matter. I had to order my men to actually stop them, and even grabbed one of the lizards himself. He didn't care. He actually deliberately snapped off his own tail as it's in my hand, still convulsing around, as he went in and shoved both of his blades right into another adolescent, one of the sniffs. As he screamed in sheer vengeance. The whole ordeal lasted only a few minutes, and I called for any type of medevac I could get. Thankfully, the skies were clear enough. They could send the medevacs down, and we were able to get most of them out. I say most because some were just too far gone. The one whose chest had been eaten out, what we didn't see is that sniff had already gotten to its heart and ripped one of its ventricles out. We tried to comfort him as he died, but there wasn't much comfort when you're in that much pain. The mother didn't make it either. Unfortunately, neither did her child. The child had already died in her arms long before we even got there. When the medevac crew got to us, my men immediately ran to get resupply. My platoon sergeants were very well versed in making sure that everybody got reset and ready for the next one. Thankfully, I found out that the city had already been taken, and we were on stand down until the next objective was decided. The Sniff Armada had run, surprisingly. They were down to about 20% when they decided to break contact, and only about half of them were able to jump out of the system. Their jump engines aren't quite the same as ours, so that gives us some time. We imprisoned the sniffs that we found, those that surrendered. Some decided to feint surrender, which didn't go well for them, of course. But to our absolute shock, one feigned surrender, and as A few of the men went in to get him. The son of a bitch blew the building, and the entire thing collapsed on their heads. No one made it. I guess they understand asset denial. Looking over the battlefield, I could see that 3 of the 4 of those giant machines had actually gone down. It wasn't just the 2 I saw. Only one remained, and it was the one with the most armor, and the scariest looking son of a bitch I've ever seen, as far as machines go. My platoon was over 30% in casualties. 40% if you want to count those who just said, oh, it's a scratch. Unfortunately, I had to take more dog tags and prepare to write more letters that day. I still hate that job, but it has to be done. The lizards were liberated within 2 weeks of that time. They were so grateful to have their planet back and demanded some sort of recompense for what was done to them. We tried to stop them from slaughtering all the snips that had surrendered, as that is not our way. We don't just kill those who surrendered. Not anymore. So we took them off planet. The lizards will have a long time to recover, and so will we. Our fleet actually did take a beating on that, as those that did not retreat on the Sniff Armada did actually make it within our lines and disabled several of our ships, destroying only one. However, it was easily found out that if for some reason they decide to charge in with a full force of 10 times that size, it would be one hell of a knife fight in space. Simply meaning that every single weapon can be used at once. And the resulting drift of disabled vessels running into everybody would be just as dangerous as the weapons themselves. It's a good thing we just got the word that we are staying here for at least a month, maybe 2, as we help the lizards retake and refit their planet. There's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be done, and my men need a break. Maybe helping build this planet instead of breaking it apart will help. But right now, I miss home. I miss my wife. However, I got a job to do.